Hello there, boys and girls. I hope you're seated so comfortably because you've just found yourself in a classroom of a very eccentric academy. My name is Cademan, or as members of Starfleet might call me, Mr. Cow. Now wrap yourself up like a mummy and jump in your coffin, because today we are reviewing the Star Trek Voyager episode Emanations. Whoa! What? I thought I was dead. I guess I'm in the afterlife now. And, whoa, the afterlife looks a lot like my office back at the school. Oh well, I guess it's time to do a review. So I really liked this episode. To me, this episode is sort of embodies a lot of what Star Trek should be. There's a quote from the Brandon Sanderson novel, The Way of Kings, that goes something like, storytellers aren't meant to give you answers, but instead they're able to give you something to think about. Now, with that being said, I think there is room for a little bit of preachiness within storytelling, and I think there's a lot of preachy stories that can be very good as well. But ultimately, I do feel like in the realm of Star Trek, that is the vibe that works the best. That is sort of what Star Trek should be about. It should give you things to think about, put you in interesting moral scenarios that you can think, okay, what's right, what's wrong. With that being said, this episode does a good job of asking the question, what happens after life? What if it is just we all die and we're just put to sleep forever? Now, as I'm sure you know, I am a Christian, and I want to sort of take a look at this episode from that perspective. And I feel like, sort of as a Christian, this episode does a better job of not being, how can I say, maybe offensive or aggressively anti-religion, which other episodes of Star Trek have a habit of kind of being. And I think part of the reason why is because this episode, well, at first glance it may come across as religion bad and it convinces people it's okay to die. That could be a reading of this episode. I feel like this episode does go out of its way to say, I don't know what happens when we die, do you? I don't think anyone knows what happens when we die. So I kind of liked it in that regard. It didn't come off as preachy, it came off more of as just asking a question and, giving us something to think about. Right? Do we know what happens when we die? Why are we so convinced of that we have the right answer? And I would draw out that this episode feels like it sort of begs that question to maybe both sides of the argument, both to the Christian and the atheist. right? To the Christian, it says, well, how can you be sure that you actually appear in heaven? And to the atheist, it says, well, how can you know that we don't have some part of us that is something like a soul that leaves our corpse and goes into heaven? And the reason I say that is because of this scene with Janeway and Kim at the end.
I mean, all those people think that they know what happens after death. They look forward to it. They're prepared for it. But the truth is, none of it's real. They don't have an afterlife. They just decay inside those asteroids.
I wouldn't be so sure of that if I were you. That neural energy their bodies release, it becomes part of the ambient electromagnetic field surrounding the planet. Our readings also indicate the energy is unusually dynamic. There's a great deal of variation in pattern complexity, quantum density.
Are you saying you think they do have an afterlife? That the energy field is where they exist at a higher level of consciousness, just like they believe?
I'm not certain. But I am certain about this. What we don't know about death is far, far greater than what we do know.
But with that being said, that's sort of the theme of the episode. But what about the parts? What about the storytelling itself? What about the moments within the episode? Well, first off, something that I thought was a little goofy is in the beginning, they're on an asteroid walking through these spider webs. What looks like spider webs anyway. And Chakotay runs into a big bunch of what looks like spider webs. And instead of being like, it's spider webs, or, mentioning something of it being spider webs, he says, what is this? And obviously in the context of the show, we figure out that the spider webs aren't actually spider webs, but are bodies decomposing. I believe something like that is what it is. But I feel like it's kind of weird that no one said, maybe there's a giant spider on this asteroid. And I have to say, watching it, it's sort of disappointing there were no giant spiders in this episode. But I thought the vibe of the asteroid was pretty cool. I like the idea of the tomb and people being teleported in and out, and I like spider webs. If you haven't noticed, I like things that are a little bit spooky. So I thought the atmosphere of this asteroid was pretty spooky. A little disappointed there was no giant spiders, because giant spiders are rad as heck, but, it's fine. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the man who was supposed to die, the man who had planned to go through sort of the death ceremony and be transported onto the asteroid. However, when Harry Kim appears and tells him that actually there's a bunch of dead dudes on the asteroid, he thinks, oh, maybe the afterlife isn't what I thought it was, and maybe I don't want to die quite yet. This is really interesting because Harry Kim, when the man says that he had planned to die, and actually it was his family's idea, because they said that they'll see him in the afterlife, Harry Kim's like, oh, I find that to be disturbing. And my reaction is very much the same. But it is interesting, the concept of a society that is so sure they know what happens after death, that they're okay when life gets a little bit difficult, just saying, man, time for me to go to the afterlife. Now, from a Christian perspective, I believe that it's not our job to decide when we go to that afterlife. But I believe that God keeps us on the earth for a certain reason. I believe there is a reason that I am still alive right now. There's still people I can reach. And on top of that, the struggle of life isn't actually something worth being sad or annoyed about, but rather the struggle of life just sort of is actually what sort of helps us to grow in sanctification, and oftentimes makes us a more useful tool for God. If you are not religious, you might be sort of rolling your eyes at what I'm saying and thinking that sort of sounds like excuses, but that is honestly what I believe. But on that note, I think that's where I gotta end this video. But I appreciate so much that you stuck around and watched the entire thing. And I would love to know, what are your thoughts about this particular episode? Did it read to you as anti-religious? Or do you have similar thoughts to me, where it reads like, here's something to think about? Do you think Star Trek is better when it's a little preachy? I don't know. I want to hear what you think. And I do appreciate likes and subscriptions, so if you want to enroll in my school, you hit the subscribe button and YouTube will notify you anytime I post a video. If you like Star Trek, Doctor Who, or Supernatural, those are the things I'm reviewing right now. So, I would subscribe to the channel if you want to hear what I think of those things. If you want to watch a review of the Doctor Who episode, The Spider and the Engine, which surprisingly I actually liked quite a bit, which is odd for modern Doctor Who, but I'll link that video right there, because it does have a giant spider, unlike this video. If you want to watch the rest of my Star Trek reviews, that will be linked right there. But until next time, God bless you, and live fantastic. Farewell. Maybe I'm not in the afterlife. Maybe this is just my office.